All right.
Okay.
So yes, good morning, everybody. It is 10:30. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to hand it off to Parker. Parker, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We're gonna give a few minutes as people continue to join. I want to thank all of you for coming. And I also want to first introduce myself a little bit. My name is Parker Dolton, and I am a research analyst at Nonviolence International in New York. And I am also a student at Utah Valley University, and I am studying political science, and I'm also minoring in constitutional studies, as well as French, and I'm getting a certificate in national security studies. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm very, very excited to have you all here. I recognize some of you, and I'm excited to meet the rest of you. As far as today's event, I am excited to introduce our speakers. Before I do that, I want to introduce the topic a little bit and discuss a little bit why I've decided to choose the topic and decide to engage in this discussion. So the title of this webinar is A Renewed Focus on Civil Society Engagement Through Education, the fusion of education and technology in a COVID-19 world. That's a pretty big title, and it encompasses a lot of different elements. My goal when I first set out to have this webinar was to find various stakeholders who have real world experience and be able to unite them with impassioned youth and other individuals who are ready to and willing to make a change. I read an article. It's a report published and then republished by the World Bank. And let me share my screen here, and I will show you a little bit about what it is. One second. Okay, so can you guys all see this?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll notice that you'll notice a couple of different things. There are a lot of different numbers, a lot of different graphs, but the thing I want you guys to pay attention is the following. From 2006 to 2020, BTI, which is the organization that does these studies, average political participation has declined. Rule of law has declined. And political and social integration has declined. And this study has a total of 137 countries, mainly developing nations across the world. And within the United States, there has been a decline in civil discussion and civil engagement. So what I want to do is figure out a way to start to fix that on a global scale. And that's the reason why I created this. There has perhaps never been a time more important than right now to be an engaged and passionate individual who's willing to come together as a community locally and globally to affect change. During our COVID crisis, this has been a huge problem, and this has been brought to the front of our global set of issues. I woke up this morning and I read a couple of articles, I read a couple of headlines, and I read a disturbing headline that said that as of today, 22 million cases of COVID-19 globally have been diagnosed. 22 million. I say all of this not to frighten you, not to discourage all of you, but to bring to light the need to work together and find solutions. And I believe that that starts with thoughtful discussions like the ones we're having today. So a little bit about the schedule for the rest of the webinar. It is 10:35 right now. This webinar is scheduled to go to 11:45. So the majority of the webinar is going to be, I want to begin the webinar by engaging in a discussion between our two panelist speakers. And then the last 20 minutes will be opened to general audience participation and question and answer period. And during that, you may unmute yourselves and ask your question. So it is my great honor to introduce our two speakers. They both come from a sustained service at the United Nations, and they are both very, very important members of our global community. And first, I want to introduce Richard Jordan. So, Richard Jordan, after studying classical languages, theology, and philosophy at Iona College in Rochelle, New York, he pursued careers at the NYU Bovis Library in legal proofreading and in selling out-of-print books before first appearing on the UN scene in 1980. It was always his desire to come to the UN every day in order to understand different cultures and how decisions were made and what the elements of being a good diplomat were. As a few highlights in multi-decades of work on a daily basis with non-governmental organizations, Richard was one of 5 original co-founding editors of the Earth Negotiations Bulletin and served as the chair of the 2007 Global NGO Conference on Climate Change. Along with Her Royal Highness Princess Dr. Noreen El Hashemit, the Executive Director of the Royal Academy of Science International Trust, she worked closely with the delegation of Malta to establish the International Day of Women and Girls in Science on February 11th annually. Richard is currently in the process of writing a book about what he calls, quote, the real 75th anniversary of the United Nations, a few years hence. On a personal note, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Richard Jordan at Utah Valley University, where I attend school, and he came and gave a number of keynote presentations, and I was immediately struck by his professionalism and his knowledge of the inner workings of the United Nations. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Richard, and also if you could go ahead and explain a little bit about what you do and your role at the UN, I would greatly appreciate it.
Sure, Parker, thank you very much, and hello to everyone, and a great pleasure to speak with Pelayo from UNITAR, which is certainly one of the unsung parts of the UN system, one of the programs and agencies, and I can't say enough about what they do in terms of training everyone in the UN. It's really an open door policy and great leadership from the New York office under Ambassador Marco and the staff, Pelayo and others. So I also have to give a shout out to Utah Valley University, go Wolverines, and how as an NGO, being a non-governmental organization representative, being at the UN every day from 8 a.m. Till 6 p.m. At the Commission on the Status of Women, there was a side event on sustainable development in mountain areas. And I thought to myself, I really don't know that much about that topic. And so I went to the session, and lo and behold, there was Dr. Bach, who's with us also, Rusty, many others, and such a professional presentation, so well organized that it started a relationship which lasts, of course, through today. So, and great thanks to Dr. Lago, who's the Chief International Officer also at Utah Valley University. Civil society is a term that covers many different groups that participate not only inside the UN, but outside of the UN. Within the UN system, there is a categorization of sectors, such as youth, women, business and industry, farmers, local authorities, science and technology. These are called 9 major groups. And they were conceived in the run-up to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, simply because there were so many organizations that wanted to participate in Rio that the governments decided, well, there should be some way to bring the representatives into different groups so that speaking would be facilitated in an easy way. Non-governmental organizations that are accredited to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations are given what we call a consultative relationship in Article 71 of the UN Charter. The Department of Global Communications, formerly called the Department of Public Information, also accredits or associates non-governmental organizations to them for purposes of outreach. And I have to tell you that DGC, Department of Global Communication, really brings youth into the forefront. Great advances have been made in the last 10 years through the Department of Global Communications in getting youth voice and not only into the system, but genuinely participating. The Secretary General has appointed a group of youth climate ambassadors who report to him directly. So that's a real step forward. The programs and agencies of the UN system, many of them like UN Environment Program, have different types of organizations such as faith traditions. I'm going to hold up a booklet called Earth and Faith, which was published in 2000. And these are perspectives from different religious traditions, including Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, on the environment and what their traditions say. There also have been champions of non-governmental organizations that have allowed us to get our voice more effectively into the system. And I will simply mention 2 of those people. One was Adama Samaseku, who was the president of the preparatory meeting for the World Summit on the Information Society. And he brought into the mix different types of what those groups were, different communities of practice, such as a group called the think tanks. There is no such group in the UN system called the think tanks. at least from a civil society point of view. So he was one of our champions. Ambassador Satyanandan, who is the great expert and father of the law of the sea, Ambassador Nandan enabled real grassroots organizations, fisherfolk from India, to speak at the sessions on the creation of a convention on highly migratory and straddling fish stocks. And it was because of the ability of member states to get to know us, to trust us. And there was an old show on US TV called Who Do You Trust?, starring Johnny Carson. It really is about trust. How do we all build relationships with each other? And I am extremely proud of my relationship with the executive director of UNITAR, Mr. Nicky Seth, who's in Geneva. We've known each other since the preparatory meetings of the Rio 92 Earth Summit. And the ability to know him and to benefit from being able to bring his expertise to NGOs has been something that is one of my highlights in the UN system. So I think I'm going to stop there and turn it back to you, Parker. And I'll mute myself until you give me another high sign.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Excellent words and really very interesting information about NGOs at the UN and your great understanding of the importance of building relationships and building strong communications between different groups within civil society and out as well. So thank you for that. Our second panelist speaker, who I will introduce, is Mr. Pelayo Alvarez. So Mr. Pelayo Alvarez works for UNITAR, which is the UN Institute for Training and Research, at its New York office as its program coordinator. Since 2015, he has supported the project implementation coordination for more than 1,000 diplomats every year. He is the focal point for the series with Columbia University on conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation, which takes place twice every year, strengthening skills on multilateral conflict resolution processes and how to implement them towards solving the world's issues. He's also the focal point for the yearly Sustainable Development Goals Learning, Training, and Practice Center, which serves as a platform for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda presented by the UN system, government, academia, and private sector institutions. Prior to joining UNITAR, Mr. Alvarez worked for the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs and their Department of Public Administration and Development Management, organizing trainings on open government data in Latin America. As part of his education, he holds a master's degree in business administration and a bachelor's degree in economics from the University Carlos III. Mr. Alvarez was recently named an honorary fellow of the Foreign Policy Association and was also trained as a mediator by the Columbia Law School Mediation Clinic. On a personal note, I can say that his office and especially Mr. Harris Latif has been phenomenal with communication and support with Nonviolence International New York. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Alvarez. Mr. Alvarez, if you could introduce yourself a little bit more and your role, and also explain the mission of UNITAR a little bit, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Parker, for that very kind introduction. is really appreciated. And thank you for everybody who's here and who wants to hear a little bit more about what we do. I'm really honored to be sharing my experience through UNITAR. I'll try to focus in everything that I've done in more like a practical way and how I found ways of interacting with civil society through my 5 years in UNITAR specifically. Like Parker mentioned, I am in charge of the program implementation of all the different trainings that take place in New York for the diplomats. We are a small office, so I really appreciated the compliments to Harris, Amy, and the rest of our team, who are really working very hard to make our trainings happen. We have different areas of training, focusing on like the core diplomatic issues mentioned, for example, General Assembly, Security Council, or Economic and Social Affairs Council, where we equip the diplomats with the knowledge and skills necessary to fulfill their tasks during their mission here in New York. And we also train them in terms of skills. So we focus on negotiation, mediation, conflict resolution, leadership, and different practical skills that are very transferable and will be serving them for the rest of their professional career. At the same time, we also partner with civil society organizations, like, for example, Nonviolence International, in order to be able to have a broader reach with our participants and beneficiaries, and take advantage of the expertise that civil society has. In this case, for example, with Nonviolent International, we've extended our program, Global Diplomacy Initiative, to the New York graduate plan, where participants who are from completely outside the UN, maybe studying international relations, or maybe just interested in the subject, young professional, graduate students. The audience is pretty broad. The main focus is that they are interested in the subject of the United Nations. And we kind of open the door for all these individuals who can have a real peek, a real view into the ins and outs of how the UN works from the inside. And the way we do it is in a practical and theoretical way. The practical way, it's equipping them with attending different meetings and seeing how like different investigations of the UN work. And then we have also, of course, like a more theoretical part where students can benefit from lectures from ambassadors or former diplomats that equip them with knowledge that is very difficult usually to access. So we want to be that kind of like door for civil society. We'll be starting in fall 2020, and we're really excited to keep it going, even though of the COVID crisis, we had to be adapted to an online format, but it's something that it really won't stop us to equip these participants with the skills and knowledge that they deserve. And like I said, I will be focusing more on like my experience through these years and the practicalities of all that. So thank you so much for being here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alvarez. I do appreciate your being here as a panelist. And also, I want to voice my appreciation for UNITAR as an organization. I think that they are leading the way towards global engagement in many ways, and their innovative learning strategies are going to prove very, very important and already have proved extremely valuable. So thank you. And I look forward to learning from both you, Mr. Jordan, and you, Mr. Alvarez. This first question, as I mentioned, the remainder of the webinar is going to be divided. The majority of it will be my asking questions to our two panelist speakers, and then the remaining 20 minutes will be opened up to all of you, and then I will conclude in the last 5 minutes. With that, let's jump right into it. So this first question is for Richard, and I appreciate that our attendees come from diverse backgrounds, and many of whom are calling in from all around the country, and indeed all around the world as well. So I am hoping that you can define to us what civil society is, because often we use this term civil society and for a discussion predicated on the idea of building civil society and building that notion, it's important to have a concrete definition. So if you'd be so kind as to define it a little bit, I would appreciate that.
Sure, thank you. Civil society has evolved through the 40 years I've been at the UN as a representative of different non-governmental organizations, and the term. But let me go first to since you're majoring in French, Parker. This is a very important point. The term sustainable development was first used, according to the director of the Natural History Museum in Paris, at a conference at his museum in 1927, and the term was développement durable, which means resilient development. So when we talk about sustainable development and how the UN is looking at leaving no one behind, this is a very difficult concept to implement. But the UN over the years, and there has been a huge change where if you were an NGO in the 1980s and at the UN, you really didn't talk very much to diplomats. That has totally changed. Eric Falt, who was the director of the outreach program for the Department of Global Communications, wrote a book called Natural Allies. So governments and civil society representatives, and civil society can be local New York City organizations, can be universities such as Utah Valley University in academics. It's a very broad definition right now. So that has evolved over time. And the UN has wanted, in this 75th anniversary year coming up, the UN has wanted to have a global conversation with many people on the outside. One of the interesting aspects of the UN, there's a committee on non-governmental organizations. And very often in the 1990s, there were motorcycle clubs that would apply for status with the United Nations. And many delegates would say, well, why? Why would a motorcycle club want to know anything about the UN? Should we really accredit this club, which was a nonprofit? And there was a delegate, and I won't identify the person, but the delegate always took the floor and said, these are precisely the people that the UN needs to spread the word about what the UN does. So whenever there was a motorcycle club, it received accreditation simply because this one delegate said it's just what the UN should who the people should be contacted, should know about the UN. So civil society is this very broad range of actors who self-organize very often. Sometimes it's not self-organized, it's organized by the Secretariat for speaking roles. But we have come to be what I would term a sort of a municipal symphony, a symphony of the larger global outreach. There was a 1932 movie called Love Me Tonight. You can find it on YouTube. And the first 5 minutes is the city of Paris waking up, and the sounds of occupations that no longer really exist, creating this symphony of voices, of sounds. And this is what the UN, through civil society, is trying to do, to give voices to everyone in this sort of orchestra of a conversation of instruments. So that's just perhaps not a very well articulated definition of civil society, but it's very broad and almost impossible to define.
I would respectfully disagree with you. I think that was an incredibly well articulated definition of civil society. I think that civil society at its simplest are people who otherwise wouldn't have a voice in the global or even local sphere of influence, who are impassioned and driven by their collective desire to achieve a goal and be heard. And at its simplest, I think that it's people who want to make a difference and who want to create a better world. And so I am very, very passionate about civil society. And I love that story about the motorcycle. And I agree with that delegate. And I think that people who are often misunderstood or not listened to are the exact people who need to be heard and need to be included in discussions. And that's going to be the only way that we can achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So I appreciate that answer. Next, Mr. Alvarez, could you tell me a little bit more about, and this is gonna be a hard one, could you tell me, in your opinion, what our collective goals should be in building a better, more engaged civil society on a global scale? So it's a very complex question, and it involves a lot of different actors and stakeholders. So if you could give me your thoughts on that.
Definitely. So I'm gonna focus a little bit more on what we do as UNITAR, examples practically, so it's easier to understand, and I'm being more in the place to answer the question. What we try to do when we incorporate civil society, which could be from like NGOs, academic institutions, or any other entities that have the same goal of trying to look out for the interest of a wider public, right? And the benefits are focused on the blind spots that people in the leadership or in the governments may have that can be complemented through these NGOs, academic institutions. We try to engage civil society on a global scale, and it's critical that we create spaces where these organizations can have a social interaction, can have a healthy civil society, collaborating and forming partnerships that can come up from these discussions. Forming these partnerships will be very crucial in order to achieve the mutual goals that these organizations can have, as well as receiving feedback. The UN can be receiving feedback from these organizations. A couple examples that I can mention, you mentioned that I was in charge of the Sustainable Development Goals Learning Center during the HLPF, which I will talk a little bit more after it. When we focus more on the Agenda 2030 point of view, but that's a great example of how can we have 10 sessions where we select a group of individuals from very diverse NGOs and academic institutions, and they collaborate, they create these 10 sessions together, and they form this partnership that has been, and the long term, has a great impact on how the civil society gets stronger and has more of a voice within the United Nations. Another example is, for example, the Commission of Status of Women, which Richard already referred to. But there's these spaces more and more, including the Youth Forum, which is more oriented to the younger generations, that are spaces very crucially needed in order for civil society to be more engaged on a global scale.
Thank you. That is very, very true. And I completely agree that especially youth, that is going to be a critical part of achieving not only the 2030 SDGs, but also moving past that as well. Because I fully believe that the Sustainable Development Goals are achievable and will be achieved. And so I'm looking forward to even past that. Richard, do you have anything to add to this very, very large question about what our collective goals, both as a combined civil society, but also just as a larger global community, what our collective goals should be in building a better, more engaged civil society?
Well, just very briefly, I want to go back into history. There's an NGO that's called the Communication Coordination Committee for the United Nations. And its president for many years, Dr. Harry Lerner, had an idea of creating a people's assembly at the United Nations, a parallel mechanism where global civil society, not just NGOs, could come to present their ideas and debate issues. Harry's idea now exists virtually. There are so many consultations that have been held through the last 5 years, 7 years, when the Sustainable Development Goals were being negotiated, that the dream of a people's assembly now exists virtually. So the idea of building forward better and looking backward also to our history is something I just wanted to mention. And also, just at Utah Valley University, the buildings are designed in such a way, the corridors are 30 feet wide, and there's great space, not only for thinking, but if you think now in times of social distancing, almost designed perfectly for allowing students to have the space in which to think. And UNITAR, in many ways, shares its space with civil society to do what Pelayo does in this Sustainable Development Training Center is remarkable. So I just also want to salute UNITAR and your great work, Pelayo, in giving us additional space as well. Thanks, Parker.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. My next question refers, and you touched on it a little bit, but refers to the pandemic that we find ourselves in, that has affected each and every one of us in unique and personal ways, and it has been very difficult collectively for our global community. So another aspect of why in the title it says the fusion of education and technology in a COVID-19 world is pre-COVID-19. We were already seeing difficulties with some engagement on a global scale. Since COVID-19 has started, we're actually seeing that start to be exacerbated in some areas. So what I want to do is figure out a way and implement strategies that are successful of finding successful educational initiatives using technology and in online formats, so that we can engage in global discussions and become a more unified global community. Specifically with your work, what challenges have you faced when transitioning to an online format or a virtual format? And Mr. Alvarez, I'll ask you and kind of how UNITAR has responded.
Yeah, it has been. I mean, we felt that the crisis was coming, right? I think everybody was feeling, but it's a sense of like, you never know how long it's going to last, how long the measures that you have to take will have to be in place for. And I think up to this point, we're still adapting and we're still trying to see how can we not only replicate the content of our courses and of our lectures, but to make it better, because it is not the same thing when you just have like a Zoom call. And I think that there's a need in general in education for new ways and new forms of creating these learning interactions, right? I was just talking with one of our colleagues, actually from also civil society, with which we have a partnership with, and they focus on music. And she was telling me of the challenges of learning music through Zoom, because maybe for a lecture on SDGs, a delay of half a second may not be as important, but when you're trying to practice on an instrument or on your voice or on different musical aspects, that can take a big toll in the learning scope of these individuals that are trying to make a career in music, right? And she was telling me how they have developed this technology with which the professor will be able to have a direct recording, high quality of the class and send it on real time to the students. So we're still looking at things like that will make education virtually better and more efficient, and not just adapting, like I said, but increasing the content. How we started obviously was adapting everything online, which we found it had a lot of benefits. Like, for example, no longer participants will have to travel to New York. We have our headquarters there, our office there, and it was very important for people to be present. And traveling with a huge amount of participants to another country and taking care of all those costs can be prohibitive for some countries. So right now we're able to train least developing countries still where they are, right? And we have seen an increase in the participation and interaction of every participant that joins our courses online. Anybody who has an internet connection is able to join our courses right now, but we also have to take into account that, and I know you'll ask me later probably about the challenges, so maybe I will leave that to a little bit later, but not everybody has access to internet, right? I was shocked to see that even in New York, I think around 27% of the folks that live in the city don't have access to internet. So it's just something to keep in mind when we develop this, in order to, like Richard said before, not leave anybody behind. But yeah, as like a wrap up, I would just say that the COVID crisis has highlighted that events in one part of the world directly affect everybody on the planet, in the globalized world that we are living now. And I hope that this crisis is just an example of the further international collaboration and cooperation that is needed between civil society and the rest of the world.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I view this horrible pandemic, realistically, I view it as a very terrible thing that has disrupted and destroyed many lives. I also view it in a slightly different lens, which is we have a potential to shift the way that we've been doing, shift our approach to civil society engagement on a global scale. And I believe that we can use this right now as a we can use this time right now and these models that we've learned here in the United States and abroad to catapult and use as a catalyst to explore educational initiatives and other unique opportunities. I do want to touch on some of the inequalities that have been heightened and unearthed during this COVID crisis, as you mentioned. But briefly, Richard, would you mind describing a little bit about what you've been working on with your most recent teaching experience and kind of some things you learned from that?
Thanks, Parker. Briefly, because we still have a lot to get through. I've been teaching for several years students from China who came to the United Nations and worked for 4 weeks in analyzing policy decisions, listening to strategies and roadmaps, such as the Secretary General's digital roadmap, which was released in June. But the difference in having students come to New York and working within the UN atmosphere is quite different from teaching online. One of the big challenges, and we've overcome it, is the time difference. So when I start teaching at 8 or 9 a.m., it's 8 or 9 p.m. in China. And this means that the students are at the end of their day. It's not a regular class setup. Also, how to ensure that the educational experience is designed as a collaborative between myself as a mentor and coach and the students who are in charge of their own learning. It's the Utah Valley University model. We don't have the non-traditional learners. They're really all 20-year-old students, but that's important. And being able for all of the students to listen to not only my feedback every day on their assignments, but to watch UN sessions that start at 10 a.m. Very, very difficult, but we've been able to get through that. But it's the FaceTime is extremely valuable and important to the students and to me also.
And yeah, very, very interesting. And the time difference has been a global issue and has been has been heightened, I'll say, in exploring educational initiatives virtually. It has required a lot of innovation. I attended, last week I attended a forum hosted by Google for Education. And because it was a worldwide event, they began, it was a day-and-a-half event, and it began in the Americas in the morning, and then it ended up in the Asian continent at about 3 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And you know, that is a challenging thing that does need to be overcome and thought of in a way that is collaborative in nature. So moving forward and kind of just continuing our discussion on inequalities and also problems that have been not necessarily unearthed, but brought to the forefront are the following, and it mainly has to do with access to technology and access to internet, a stable internet connection. In a New York Times article, and anybody who's interested can reach out to me, in a New York Times article entitled "Doing Schoolwork in the Parking Lot is Not a Solution," it says, quote, "An adequate connection is no longer a matter of convenience. It is a necessity for anyone wishing to participate in civil society." So my question is, first of all, do you, and this is a question for either of you, do you agree with the author's opinion? And if so, how do you think, and this is a tremendously complex question that we can't get into fully, but how do we begin to create strategies to move past this inequality and to allow more people to participate on a global scale?
Yeah, I can go ahead with that for a little bit. I was mentioning about the percentage of New York City households that don't have internet at home, but when we get into a global scale, obviously this digital divide that it's so many times referred to in the United Nations gets bigger and broader and more complex to solve, right? Because every country has its particular circumstances, and not having access to the internet it's a right. Having access to the internet, it should be a right for everybody who's part of the global education system, because more and more there's a need, and the more we leave this digital gap to grow, we'll be also incrementing other kind of differences between populations in the world. I think that I can quote the Secretary General, who mentions that more than half of the world has limited or no access to the internet, inclusivity is essential to building a digital economy that delivers for all. So we go back to that kind of like equity that we want to achieve for the members of our society. In terms of what can we do, I think that governments obviously can play a critical role in defining the rules of the game, adapting existing laws, and taking into account this that we just mentioned, that the internet is a crucial for development, a crucial tool for development. And other international organizations that are associated with the digital economy can be more involved with developing countries. In this report that I was mentioning about the digital divide of the United Nations, they were mentioning how there's now the ability to produce phones that can have almost all the different tools that our phones can have, maybe less fancy, maybe it's not going to be an iPhone, right? But for as little as like $20, a phone could be reproduced to have the basic functions that will be needed in order for everybody in the world to be connected to the internet, right? And there's a big gain that multinational corporations can get from that. So will we see these kind of things of helping other countries and taking place a role in development as a benefit for the receiving country? But there's also important to have a look at what are the benefits that even these corporations could be getting from providing this access to the internet to certain areas of the world. And I think that's obviously something that it's already been studied. It's not something new, and it's already been implemented in many areas of Africa, for example. And I look forward to seeing how the world connectivity keeps increasing, and we can reach a point where that digital gap gets reduced.
Thank you. Very, very true words. And I think a big part of bridging the digital divide will be youth and youth involvement and innovation within tech, and also transitioning the tech field away from a mainly male-dominated field to a more inclusive field, including women as well. And I can tell you, I live about 25 minutes away from Silicon Valley. I have many friends who work at Facebook and Google and all these large tech companies, and it's still a largely male-dominated field. And so I think that in addition to the role that individual member states and governments play, in addition to the role of large governing structures like the UN and other individual donors, I think that the field of technology and the educational initiatives that stem from those technologies will need to come from a more diverse and inclusive field to allow for a greater number of people and a greater accessibility to bridge that digital divide. So thank you so much. There's so much more I do want to get into, but I want to give everybody here a chance to participate and to actively engage. So I'm going to turn the time over to all of you attendees. Please ask your questions. It is now 10:24. We have until 10:45. We have until 11:45. Excuse me. So feel free to unmute yourself and yeah, let me, if you don't feel comfortable or if you're not somewhere where you can unmute, you can feel free to use the chat function and I can read it out loud. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Alvarez. Does UNITAR ever work with United Nations University? And what is the difference in mission between UNITAR and United Nations University?
Yes, thank you for your question. I don't see your name, but the difference mainly is the core statement, the statute of our institute focuses on the diplomatic community. So we also can observe that there are more institutions focused on training within the UN, like the Staff College, United Nations University, or UNITAR. And our main function is to equip diplomats with the skills that they need. So members of the government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and although some of the content that we share will be similar at some cases, in fact, in the latest resolution of the ECOSOC, the three institutions collaborated together and they were included in the same session. We focus on, the audience would be the thing that differentiates us. And currently we don't have any direct collaboration with UNU, but we're always open to collaborating with different organizations. And we have in the past done certain, I remember, I think 2 years ago, we had this United Nations education session where also the Staff College was participating, and we share like lessons learned from our journeys as educators within the UN.
Thank you. As a side note, to anybody who does ask a question, if you could introduce yourself with your name and maybe your organization or where you're calling from, that would be helpful. Thank you.
May I ask a question? My name is Baktibek Abrisayev, and I had the chance to work with Richard Dolton and with Parker as well. Thank you very much for inviting for this dialogue. And my question for Mr. Alvarez. Since 2007, here in Utah University, we are focusing on sustainable mountain development promotion and students' involvement in it, engagement. And we found out one interesting thing, Mr. Alvarez, which is probably maybe among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and more than 169 targets, there is an ocean of those different priorities and interests. So our mountain communities, who are among the poorest, maybe in the most neglected around the world, no? There are 3 targets which are hidden under the SDG number 6 and 15. And we found out that FAO, which is handling that now, we are working very closely with them. Already 5 times it was mentioned under the United Nations hosted the Women of the Mountains conference about it in order to highlight how the women are contributing their own share to the sustainability in mountain. Still, we go to the Commission status of women, because what we did under the FAO, it's not fitting. I mean, it's fitting, but there's a bureaucracy at CSW which is much more powerful than the FAO, and what is done is not they're not matching with each other. So we now need to get a similar maybe decision under the final documents of the CSW, which is much more difficult for the students to do. There are 18 different, 18 bodies, and the ECOSOC now, yes, does something, but it is an ocean of interest in how through the education to handle that. Students now need to understand also that it is not the final goal to go through one bureaucracy, because the final one is not only ECOSOC but also General Assembly. But how to do that? It's a huge undertaking.
So
Yes.
just to redefine the question, are you asking kind of with all of the different SDGs and all of the different goals, how do we focus our education specifically on achieving? Just so I understand a little bit more about the question, was that the essence of the question?
The essence of the question that maybe UNITAR also could help the student to find a bridge between the gap between different bureaucracies. Should we focus on FAO or now ECOSOC only?
I see. I think we want to focus on like the role of can UNITAR like provide in. Sorry, we're cutting out a little bit, and so I didn't get like the whole grasp of the question. But I think the conclusion would be how can we like support this network, right, and try to make civil society to appear. Obviously, the United Nations is a huge network of different organizations in which we don't have like all the different powers that we will require, and I can understand like the difficulties of working as one and delivering as one, since there's such a big amount of agencies and organizations, and then it has to be put together into these forums and these commissions, and it gets challenging to agree on language, to have all the countries on the same page, and I can understand that. On our side, we try to limit this as much as possible. We have, like I mentioned, the SDG Learning Center. It's a place where we won't have to like, this was accessible to everybody online. We had more than 7,000 participants who interested in join these sessions, and they were able to directly see and hear about the work that is being doing. So I think serving as example, presenting case studies that are able to show how to do the right thing and how to do it in a practical way, it's always in our priorities. So we are a little bit like not as much connected with those with the bureaucracy of the system, but we try to facilitate as much. And that's why our institute is one of the main parts of the UN that incorporates civil society within their activities. And we'll keep doing so for the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. What other questions do we have? If you guys need a moment to think, I also have some prepared questions as well from some audience responses when you guys registered. So I'll read one of those, and I'll give you guys a moment to think. I'm not sure. And feel free to say, I'm not sure about this. But one attendee asked, quote, "I'm intrigued by how this newly brought in Zoom-based educational format has shifted general finance principles and expectations for guest lecturers and speakers, expanding access to inviting leading figures to present to youth programs, especially for smaller educational organizations that would not have been otherwise able to afford to budget and host such speakers. Could you speak to this phenomenon a bit and your opinions on it? Do you guys think that it is true that this online virtual format is more conducive to inviting high-level diplomats, high-level speakers, or does it have an effect? Richard, do you want to answer this?
Sure, thanks, Parker. I think that certainly it's far easier now to engage with high-level representatives of countries. There are ways in which to do this. I think that we're going to have opportunities in the next year to explore that even to a greater degree than at the high-level political forum that was held just this last July. You could see, and also the financing for development session, 6 hours, and I think 30 or 40 heads of state spoke. I don't know how you would now get 30 or 40 heads of state to go anywhere, let alone to New York, to the General Assembly. Watching even the election of the president of the 75th session of the General Assembly, I watched the entire process online, and it was absolutely amazing how organized it was, but it had to be done with the protocols that we all know and observe at the UN. So I think we're going to see this more and more. The International Council for Small Business, which worked with the delegation of Argentina to establish June 27 as the International Day for Small, Micro, and Medium-Sized Enterprises, I believe will do something in 2021 on June 27th that will bring together many ministers whose portfolio is the creation of entrepreneurship, innovation, and small enterprise. So thanks.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's certainly been my experience. For one thing, I think that this meeting that we're having right now is a pretty good example of the possibilities. I guarantee you that Ms. Veronica Leitmanova, who is in Egypt right now, could not attend if it were not virtually, and I'm in California. And so, you know, it does, I won't sugarcoat it. Having this virtual Zoom-based sort of phenomenon is not the easiest because of for certain types of learners, for example, it's just a harder way to absorb information. I'm actually one of those learners. It's harder for me to grasp information like this. That being said, it does open up more possibilities as far as inviting these world-class speakers like you guys. And you know, it really does kind of have a lot of opportunities. So that is a tiny silver lining in this era that we find ourselves in. And so I am excited about that. I do have a couple of questions that have been messaged to me. Going forward past the pandemic, do you believe that there will be a hybrid form of education and meetings in the future? Meaning, given the success and necessity of these virtual meetings, do you think that we're going to utilize these types of meetings more, or are we going to revert back to just in person?
I think that obviously this change has come with a lot of revelations and a lot of understanding of how well we can work online, and how, like, obviously, like, the downside, but like also the good sides, how many trips, how many travels could have been saved, right? And how many people could have been included because this technology is not as new as we may think, right? Like, Zoom has been here for a long time, and it just probably will be the most Googled word of 2020, but it's not something that was just created a couple of months ago. And as an entity that takes care of education, we've seen the value. Sometimes you have to be forced, right? As human nature, change is not easy for anybody. And sometimes we have to be like pushed a little bit in order to incorporate these new and revolutionary aspects. So definitely, at least if we, little by little, we're gonna be incorporating to normal life, that's gonna be a hybrid probably. It's gonna be very difficult to have just a complete jump from doing everything online to 100% in person, and it will have a lot of risks associated if we do so. But little by little, as we go like 50-50, and I think the inheritance of this time, one of the good things will be how maybe we can just have like a conference come in every classroom, right? So that time that you cannot go to school, or that time that you cannot attend that meeting, or you're in a very far place of the world and you don't want to travel 24 hours in order to get to that destination, it will be seen as something more normalized, and it will be used to our advantage when we can. You know, there's obviously like a great benefit in being interactive face to face with persons, but at the same time, that is not always needed. So kind of like evaluating when and how would be the best. So it would be a case by case scenario.
Interesting. We have time for one, maybe two more questions. And then I will conclude.
I have a question. Hello, my name is Sarah Kirschbaum. We have emailed a little bit. I'm running the graduate plan, and I was just wondering, and I'm sorry if you already answered this, I came a little late. How have you adapted your programs in UNITAR to online? Have you added any features or taken any away? And do you find that, are you excited about this venture into the digital version of these programs?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I remember we were exchanging conversations and we had a connection through Zoom. I was talking a little bit at the beginning about Nonviolence International, our partnership with the New York Graduate Plan, encouraging anybody who, of course, would like to register through the program to contact anybody, me or anybody at Nonviolence International to join. And it has been exciting to adapt these classes online. It has also been in the back of my mind that not only, it seems too easy to just adapt the seminar through Zoom, right? Our attention span reduces. We are in our homes. We are busy. We are being sometimes with our, not in my case, but in a lot of cases, and as I have seen with your kids around, with your family around, that I think that one of the greatest changes, especially in the achievement of gender equality, has been the normalization of these kind of things. What can you do with a kid, right? When you have to be in a meeting, and understanding that that's normal, and seeing a kid jump in a year ago or 2 years ago, I remember it was like big news all over the world that a kid jumped into a webinar or a Zoom conference with the person that was in the news. And now it's more of like, okay, we see it more and more. So we incorporate it. Like, you are in your house, your kid is there. You're not gonna like lock your kid in the bathroom in order to like work, right? So understanding that that's something normal and has to be incorporated in building the curriculum for the courses, right? And understanding that maybe we cannot be for 6 hours in front of our computer in a Zoom call. That at least me, whenever I have a day that I'm like all day in conference calls and doing training, it gets very tiring. I would say even more tiring to the eyes and to the head than if you are in a face-to-face environment, that you can take a little break and not be in front of a screen all day. So I'm looking forward, like I mentioned at the beginning a little bit, to see new ways of education that is not only through a screen, right? How can we do it in order to be able to do more things on our own? We have this partnership with EdApp. It's very focused on gamification of education and incorporating interactive aspects into our learning. So maybe instead of like scrolling through Instagram or going to Twitter, you can open this app and learn something new that will take you maybe like 10 minutes or something like that, right? So I would say my main takeaways would be normalizing that we are in a different space, and also adapting the length of these trainings to our attention scopes, so we can still absorb information, understanding that maybe there's not a need to do a very long training in order to get something from it.
Well, thank you so much for that response. This is the conclusion of this wonderful webinar. I want to thank Mr. Richard Jordan and Mr. Pelayo Alvarez for their time and their insights. I know I learned a lot. I also wanted to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. What we've learned during this COVID-19 era is that it can be challenging to do even routine tasks and to extend yourselves and to engage in high-level discussions like this are the building blocks for the achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and moving beyond that. And I appreciate you attending, and please don't hesitate to reach out to myself with any sort of follow-up questions. Thank you so much. And
Parker, could I give a 5-word takeaway? Parker, a 5-word takeaway?
Sorry?
Could I give a 5-word takeaway for everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay. Hibernate, which I'm doing. Communicate, educate, advocate, participate. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Amazing. I'm also giving a not 5 but 7 maybe word takeaway. We haven't really spoken about the gender equality thing, and I have this tool that we share in our trainings. It's called amplification, and it's just basically when a woman is not being heard, or when someone when someone is not being heard, we basically can just amplify their voices, right? And just mention, for example, like Sarah mentioned before, I would like to share this, right? So just taking this into account as allies for the males and also for the woman to build a bigger strength chip between each other, I think is one of the tools that is kind of like very practical and a great tip to take away. So I just wanted to share that since we haven't touched on the topic today. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that this hopefully will be the first of many discussions to come, and there are many discussions to follow up about, but I'm very, very happy about what I've learned and what we've all learned. So thank you for your time, and I hope that all of you have wonderful days. Stay healthy and stay well. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.